Excited to welcome Boston Celtics Director of Player Development, Craig Luschenat, to the Basketball Podcast. Coach Luschenat brings a wealth of experience and a proven track record in player enhancement and coaching. Prior to joining the Celtics, Craig served as player development intern for Integrity Hoops and Wasserman Sports Agency clients in Los Angeles. In this role, he was responsible for planning and leading workouts for NBA talent, as well as developing strong relationships with NBA players and agents. His notable work with NBA All-Stars Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis highlights his ability to work with top-tier talent. Craig's journey in basketball began as a college player at St. Joseph College, where he played under the guidance of Rob Sanacoli. His passion for the game and dedication to player development led him to various coaching roles, including his tenure with the Maine Celtics. Craig served as an assistant coach and director of player development for the Maine Celtics from 2020 to 2000, where he played a crucial role in enhancing player performance and development. In July 2022, Craig transitioned to the Boston Celtics as a player enhancement coach, a position he held until July 2024. His exceptional skills and commitment to player growth earned him the role of assistant coach and director of player development in July 2024. Craig, welcome to the Basketball Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome to have you here. And I've known of you and about you for a while. Part of that is you did a master class in our community a bunch of years ago, but part of it as well is just your background a little bit with some of the people that you played for or helped mentor you and that you got involved with very early on. So let's first start. Congratulations, Boston Celtics assistant coach and director of player development.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. It's a dream come true. Once I first tried to get into coaching, this was a role in the organization I wanted to be in. To have it is pretty cool.
Rob Santacola and Noah LaRoche, big influences on your career, big influences, to be honest, on me as well. Both I know a little bit through different things and different interactions and studying them a little bit, and both are a little divergent. And I want you to talk a little bit about their role in your career.
Yeah, I definitely would not be here without both of them. Rob recruited me out of high school, spent 4 years with him, and always just someone that's forward thinking, trying to figure out ways to help his players and find creative ways to just improve his team. And so it was great playing for him for 4 years. During my senior year, he approached me about going to intern for this guy by the name of Noah LaRoche, who at the time I had no idea who that was, but I left my senior year of school early and went out to LA for 9 months over two different summers, an intern for Noah, and was, in my opinion, one of the best in the world at what we do, and really fortunate just to be able to learn from both those two guys. And again, would not be here without both of them.
Awesome. And Noah now working for the Memphis Grizzlies as well. So excited to see what they do in that role. For you personally, then, I know this holistic kind of player development approach has always been a part of kind of your ways of seeing development. So can you maybe help us understand what does it mean, first of all, to be the director of player development? And then how does a holistic approach fit into that?
Yeah, so in Boston, we do our best to try and cover all the bases. There's scheduled times throughout the year that the head of each department gets together and tries to put together a plan in place for each guy that we have, and whether that's nutrition or strength and conditioning or sleep or mental health, we try to cover all the bases. And obviously, what guys do on the court is extremely important, and we dive into the analytics and what the film says and try to marry those with what we do on the court. But I think if you're doing the best job you can, you're making sure that the guys are taken care of off the court as well. And we try to take that approach in Boston.
I love that. And I've been having this conversation with a lot of especially youth coaches. And I found that when it comes to kind of player evaluations or different types of feedback for players, usually it's only summary. Like from what I've studied, most coaches only give it at the end of the year, what to work on for the next season.
Right.
Can you talk to us about that? That's not how you do it. You're doing some ongoing evaluation to be able to help a player understand that they're improving.
Yeah, no question. We definitely, I'm not saying like we have all the answers. We try to put a plan in place at the beginning of the year, and then we check in on that plan multiple times throughout the year with the player and just catch them up on where they're at. How much, you should check in is a thing we've constantly been talking about. How much information is too much or what's the right amount there. But yeah, we do our best to definitely check in multiple times a year and make sure that guys are on track and understand what the goals we have in place. And that's obviously in a collaboration with those guys as well. But yeah, for sure. Try to check in as much as we can.
And then that check-in obviously becomes important, the environment that you create. Like you don't want to make it feel like they're coming in the principal's office type of thing.
That's right.
So talk to us about how you avoid some of that too. Obviously the relationships you developed in advance, but take us a little bit deeper if you could.
Yeah, we try to, again, player development's a collaboration. We put a plan in place from our organizational perspective. We'll send our guys a list of questions and have them answer those questions. And when we meet with them, we obviously listen to what they have to say. And then if there's things that we want to tailor or change or talk about, we'll do that. I'll say we have a great group of guys that kind of understand who they are and who they need to be, and usually are in line with what we're thinking. But again, it's a collaboration. The player is the most important part. And we try to do our best to make sure that they're heard.
You mentioned collaboration a few times, and I'm just curious, how do you integrate data analytics and the sports science into your player development then? Because again, you referenced too much information. The player doesn't need to know everything in terms of
Yeah.
that data, right?
So we know everything. We put together two different plans. One plan is everything, all the numbers that you can imagine. And then the plan that the player sees is the Spark Notes version of that. And so again, we try to do our best to marry the analytics with the film and what those are both saying. But we definitely think analytics are extremely important in Boston, and we try to again find any advantage we can to help our guys. And again, just trying to marry those two together.
Do you find that players nowadays, especially at the NBA level, do they understand the analytics a little bit deeper than we even might expect as a fan looking from the outside in?
Yeah, no question. It actually surprises me a lot when we go to guys with certain numbers, or they come to us at times with certain numbers on things that they see. Obviously, they're privy to a lot of the information out there, whether it's on Twitter, and obviously that's not always the right information, but they're aware of what the foundation, the baseline of analytics are, and where their numbers fall within that. So, yeah, I would say each guys, as the years go on, are getting more and more familiar with the numbers and the analytics.
Of course, player development is just more than one thing, but I know like early on in your player development experience, you're exposed to constraints-led approach, game-based development in terms of player development through what Noah does and other people. So talk to us about how that experience of learning that stuff early in player development has helped shape who you are as a player development coach.
Yeah, no question. Again, Noah's one of the best in the world at what he does. And it was a great learning experience for me to have that as my foundation. And like you just said, constraint-led approach. And it's definitely at the foundation of how we approach things as well. And I think for me, the three biggest things is the game is skill, decision making, problem solving. And if we can train those three areas, I think we're going to be in a good spot. And there's a million ways to do that. But we try to do our best to make sure we're tackling those three areas on a day-to-day basis, and by using constraints and bodies, and making guys make decisions and reads, and growing their IQ and skill and problem solving.
Can you take us a little bit deeper? Maybe give us an example of something. Just first of all, maybe for coaches that don't completely understand a constraint-led approach, what is that in your mind? And then secondly, what might be an example of something a coach could use as a constraint-led approach in a player development session?
Yeah, it's just trying to create an environment for a player that, you know, by using different tools to get the outcome that you want. And so you can do that in a lot of different ways. It could be as simple as, hey, we're doing a finishing drill, and you can only finish on the right side of the rim. You can only finish with this finish. You can only, again, you put the constraint to how you want it, but it can be as simple as that. But again, just trying to create an environment that makes sense for that player is really what it comes down to. And by using constraints, you can tailor that environment to help that player.
So essentially limit their use of the, say, the right side of the rim so that they're afforded the opportunity to work on the left side of the rim finishes, which may be something that they have to add something, or it could be something that you just want to make even better because they're already good at it. So there's
Correct.
different ways to be able to approach it, isn't there?
No question. Yeah, no question. Again, it just comes down to what that player needs and what environment you need to build for them to improve on their weaknesses or grow their strengths, as you said.
And I'm curious about your thoughts on this, because I feel that too often in player development space, we just talk about adding something to a player's game, but sometimes eliminating something is just as important. So maybe can you give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no question. For each player, it's on us to figure out how we can best help that player be successful within the construct of our team. And so depending on who it is, you need that player to fill a role that can impact winning. And so we're constantly just trying to find ways to help players impact winning. And whether that be adding something or taking something away from their game, again, it comes down to for us, how can you best help move the scoreboard for us in a positive direction?
So I'm finding that modern approaches to skill development and player development, like you're talking about here, there's still a place for technique development. There's still a place for on air. There's still a place for 1-on-0. So these coaches think that we're not saying that those things are a part of it. Can you shape that a little bit for us? Because you mentioned the three categories: skill, decision making, problem solving. So maybe
Yeah.
talk specifically about skill in terms of that technique development.
Yeah. So it's funny, like it depends at each level where you're at. And that can be within the NBA and that can or be youth, college, NBA, or pro. But I talk about all the time with our guys, there is a hierarchy of what is most important in the 30, 45-hour session that we have together. And at times, specific skills like a ball handling or a specific floater you're shooting, whatever it may be, that can fall beneath the training of decision making, problem solving, because we'll get all of that within the drills we're doing. But it's also about understanding where the player's at day to day, right? Maybe there's a day where this guy just needs straight skill work just to help him feel good. Maybe he's going through a slump or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of variables at play. But yeah, like I said, skill is obviously a huge component of being a great player. And so we try to train our skills within environments that are working on multiple things and not just an isolated skill at times. Our guys do a great job of before they get on the court, I'm going to do a quick ball handling session by myself, or I'm going to do a quick form shooting session by myself so that when I step on the court in a group or in a setting with coaches, I'm ready to go and I'm ready to hit the ground running. I think we really emphasize not trying to waste time warming up, right? Like when you step onto the floor with us, like you should be ready to rock. And the best players that we've had are that way. And there's a lot of variables at play with when you're doing what, but there's a hierarchy to what is most important within a workout. And you only have so much time. And so you have to figure out, again, for each player, what is the most important thing. Maybe for a certain player, shooting the basketball is the only thing we need to get better at. And so we're going to hammer that as much as possible. But again, it just depends player to player.
I just want to highlight one thing you said about wasting time with warm-ups and stuff. My daughter went to a session because her friends went to a session with a trainer, and it was a 45-minute session, and they did 20 minutes of just warming up.
Right.
And again, like I encourage parents to look at that and go, what are you paying for? You're paying for someone to help you get better at basketball. If they're
Yeah.
not getting better at basketball, what are they doing?
Yeah. And we're very fortunate in the NBA. We have a lot of resources, a lot of bodies that can be available to help us and to have allotted times for our guys. And during that allotted time, we have coaches available for you. And so we need to make sure that we're using that time and those coaches and those resources in the most valuable way. And again, like if you're a driven player, you're gonna work on your ball handling, you're gonna work on your shooting in small pockets where you can by yourself, or we'll do that later in a one-on-one session. But for the meat and potatoes of our workouts, we want those to be as failure based and hard and decision making problem solving as we can. Like that is where we view as what we view as the most important thing. And so we try to attack that at the top of the list every day.
It's so amazing hearing you talk about this. And I phrase it as player-led development. It's like a lot of things you talked about, a player can do by themselves. But what
Yeah.
you're highlighting is the value of you as a coach or the other coaches that are involved in the workout is that you can help a player connect these other things, which is the problem solving and the different things that come from that. So I just love that you phrased it in terms of this hierarchy and then presented it in that way, because I do think that's something actionable that all levels of coaches can take from this conversation.
Yeah. I think, right. If you look at a game, we saw all the time, like within a game, a player is going to make 10,000 decisions, right? Where to step, where to run to, where it's a cut to, right? And so they might take 10 shots, but they're going to make 10,000 decisions in the game. And obviously those are weighted differently, but if you can just continually make the right decision, and for a lot of times there's only one or two stars on every team. And for everybody else, it's how can you fit in around that? And so again, we just stress as much as we can, just when you are in a position to make the right decision, making sure you're acing that test.
I want to come back to that a little bit about the difference in a star and a non-star in terms of a workout, if it does change anything. But basically, what you're highlighting is the decision in a lot of ways is more important than the skill, because if they make the right decision, chances are they're going to apply the right skill
Right.
in that way. And that's really a part that I think a lot of people miss in this development process is there's so much technique-based development that they don't know how to actually make the decision to apply it.
And there's obviously, again, depending on what level you're at, there's a foundation that you need of skill. And if you're learning a new skill, then that needs to be very blocked and it needs to be high rep and all that as a foundation. But once you have a certain foundation, the way you grow on that foundation is by, again, stretching and failing. And the way you do that is by having coaches on the floor that are putting you in different situations to make you fail and stretch.
I love it. You're highlighting so many things for coaches. Failure based. I love that phrasing because, again, at the end of the day, it's not just about skill development, it's also about mindset development. And that's a
Right.
huge piece of that failure based approach, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest things that I try to stress is I think if you walk into any gym in the world, the coach and the player both want to feel like the workout's going well. It's just natural. Like the player wants to feel like they're making shots and everything's going well. And the coaches want to feel like the players feel like they're getting better because they're making shots. When in reality, you just want the opposite. You want as much failure and as much self-correction and self-organization as possible. And so, again, there's a balance there, but we believe in Boston just for you to stretch and grow, like you need to fail.
I trained my niece once, who high level player, played really high level high school, played in college at a Division 1. And the first time I trained her, she struggled so much. And then I realized from there that I had to explain to her that the way that we were training was going to cause struggle. And ever since then, I've always given context to what we're going to do to new players. Is that something you experience too with new players, that you have to explain that this is a part of it?
A great question. Yes, absolutely. At the beginning of the year, basically go through how we approach player development with our guys and why we're doing things the way we're doing them, and so that it makes sense to them and that they can get on board with, again, why we're doing what we're doing.
And why you're doing what you're doing is that they struggle, and through struggle, they grow. And if there's no
Right.
struggle, you're not growing. You're basically just repeating what you can do already.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's something that we stress every day with our coaches, and our players do a phenomenal job of kind of buying into that, and they love to be challenged and stretched, and credit to them.
I try and explain this. I'm curious your phrasing or the way that you explain things to players or to even coaches in certain ways, but about this idea of nonlinear development. That it seems to be something that we have to really highlight for players, that you're not who you are, that you can grow. And even if it's 1%, there's still growth, right? So can you
Right.
talk to us about how you phrase that?
Yeah, I think obviously, again, different parts of the year breed different things, different ways of stretching and growing. If we're in the off season, we're trying to grow it a lot, right? If we're in season, we're still trying to grow, but we're trying to make guys feel comfortable for the next game. And so it's just a balance of, again, where a player is at, what part of the year it's at, and what that guy needs.
I love this. You're bringing up basically the concept of periodization in terms of that training. Periodization is essentially a training method that involves dividing a training program into phases or cycles. And there's certain times of the year where you can push them and cause them to struggle more. And there's certain times where you want them to be comfortable. Can you
Yep.
just, as a broad spectrum, take us through that kind of from a season perspective?
Yeah. And then it also depends within a season as well, right? Have a guy that's going through a shooting slump. And I say all the time, the art of coaching is knowing when to do what, right? And you need to know when in the off season, obviously, we're trying to really attack. We're trying to improve as much as possible. And then in season, again, we're trying to improve, but we're trying to feel really good for that next opponent. And so again, within that, if we're not playing as much or a guy is playing a lot, there's a lot of variables at play there. But yeah, there's definitely a time and place for each of those things, and knowing when to do what is the art of coaching.
So you've highlighted this a few times, this concept of the law of biological individuality, that obviously each player is different and unique. So we can't cookie cutter the same thing for every player. You reference it particularly, which I wanted to come back to, the difference between a star and a role player, so to speak. Is there a big difference in a player development workout for a star versus a role player?
The only difference is what they're working on, but how it's being done, no, I think like again, as much failure as possible is the number one thing, and as much problem solving and decision making as possible, and just being uncomfortable and leaning into being uncomfortable. But obviously, what each guy is working on is going to be tailored to what that person needs. But how we go about it, we try to keep it the same.
You referenced problem solving. Can you talk to us a little bit and maybe give us an example of something that we can do to stimulate problem solving within a player development workout?
Yeah, you could just be in disadvantaged situations, and it's figuring out how to put out fires, and or you could be in an advanced situation and it's figuring out how can I most efficiently score or whatever whatever the workout's calling for. But again, it's a lot of different ways you can do it. Advantage and disadvantage situations are good ways to train it.
So advantage, disadvantage situations and neutral situations, meaning you have neither. So all those things come into play a little bit. Is there a danger towards weighting them in any particular way? Or is that, again, like very specific to certain players that they need more work in one area versus another?
Yeah, I think it's again to each player, right? What does that player need? Again, and it's offense, defense too, right? I think a lot of times some of the best ways to train defense is by figuring out problems, putting in disadvantaged situations and having to figure it out. It depends on what you're training specifically. But yeah, we do our best to try and figure out the best ways we can to have guys think and react and figure out solutions to problems.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of times when we think about it as coaches, we think about player development as offensive development, but clearly there's a big part of that that's defensive development. So are you putting players in defensive situations within, say, these player development sessions where they have to develop certain defensive technique, defensive problem solving situations?
Yeah, every day, every workout, depending on what the player needs, right? Again, is going to determine how we attack that workout. But there's a defensive component to every workout with every player, and doesn't necessarily always need to be crazy long or difficult. But for some players, that's the most important thing. There's some players where their 30-minute workout will be all defense because that's the number one thing that's going to get them on the floor. If it's a big, being able to protect the rim, that's the number one priority for that person. It just again depends player to player.
So let's talk about something maybe specific. Talk about maybe a closeout, improving ability to be able to close out, the decision on the closeout, the problem solving on the closeout in particular, rather than the technique. What are some ways that we can create some variability so it doesn't become this repeatable thing? Because that seems to be one of the challenges coaches have with closeout development.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can change the stimulus on. You can make it so it's not a same spot situation. You can make it so the pass is coming from a different area. You can make it so the person who's closing out is coming from a different area. There's, you know, you can make it has to be a three, or it has to be a layup, or there's a lot of different constraints and variables you can throw at players. We've done things plenty of times with our shooters where it's two contests, two closeouts, and figuring that out and how to shoot through two guys. And so there's a ton of different variables you can and constraints you can put on a player.
And then I'm imagining with a representative environment, are you adding extra coaches, extra players in terms of some of those spots, say one pass away or different situations, so it doesn't become too big of an advantage or very unrepresentative of a game situation?
Yeah, no question. I think we try to make things as hard as possible and harder than the game. And we'll have a defender that's guarding the passer. We'll have a defender that's guarding the rim. We'll have a defender that's obviously guarding the closeout. And depending on how many guys we have, we'll make it as 5-on-5 as possible. But we're using arms, we're using everything we can to make it as difficult as possible.
It makes sense. And I'm curious, like I get in this conversation a lot with college coaches, especially head coaches, You don't have to talk about Coach Missoula specifically, but just in general with your philosophy, how important, you're an assistant coach, how important is it that a head coach is somehow involved in some of these player development sessions to be able to connect those things together?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the most important. Very lucky in Boston. Obviously, everybody knows Joe as the head coach of the Celtics, but before he was the head coach of the Celtics, he's, in my opinion, one of the best player development coaches I've ever been around. He's just got covers all the bases in terms of coaching, and how he approaches our practices is a very player development led approach. We are constantly talking about ways that we can do more player development and less quote unquote practice per se. And he's at the forefront of that and wants to be on the court, wants to be involved. And he's as elite as it gets in terms of that.
So he's not involved in every session, but does he pop in? Do you want him to pop in? Does that become a different environment? Because I know some coaches get it like, oh, if I'm always there, then they're never away from me type of thing. And there's probably a healthy balance to it all. So I'm just curious your advice to head coaches out there.
Yeah, no question. There's definitely a balance there. He will at times look to take a certain guy on a certain day and touch him for a day when if they need him to feel some love or whatever the case may be. But he's very hands off in terms of letting us as coaches do our jobs, and he'll just pop in and check in and see how's everything going. But depending on the day, maybe he'll take a guy for a day and show him some love. And I think that's, probably the best way to try and approach it.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've referenced this a few times, and I want you to connect it for us because there's still this very siloed approach to player development in a lot of spaces around basketball. And what you're talking about is this, and you reference it with what Missoula kind of likes for practice, is connecting player development to team development, that they're not separate, they're all together. So can you talk
Yeah.
more about that emphasis and the importance of that?
Yeah, no question. I think from a macro perspective, right, the better players you have, the better team you're going to have, right? And so the more you can help your players improve, right, the more it's going to help your team in the long run. And but again, like the way we structure our drills, practice drills is a very constraint-led approach. And again, just trying to create as much failure and chaos and problem solving and decision making as possible within those drills, and just try to remove as much structure, quote unquote, or blocked, quote unquote, or mindless. I think historically a lot of practices tend to have at times, and sometimes you need that again if you're teaching, but as much as you can have your brain turned on as possible, I think the better.
You've had your brain turned on to this for a very long time, and I don't want to take away your advantage, obviously, with the Celtics, but it does seem like more and more NBA teams are embracing this type of approach. But there's still so much resistance to this in levels below. And I still have so many conversations with people that have literally never heard of some of these things we're talking about right now. So I'm curious about, from your perspective, about some of those conversations. How can I do a better job opening people's minds about these ways, which again, evidence and experiential paint a picture of saying there's value to this.
Again, it totally depends on where you're at and where your players are at. But I think if you look at the literature, you look at what has kind of have taken over in all sports, really. If you just look across all sports, this has been the trend over the past 10 or so years. And I've never necessarily tell someone that they have to do something this way or that way, but I think it's just something that we value in Boston, and think it's, important for our guys.
In 10 years, I've never told anyone to do it either. I'm just
Yeah.
sharing it and saying, hey, this is out there. And
Yeah.
I guess it was my surprise 10 years ago when I started Basketball Immersion, how few people knew about any of this. And it
Right.
is awesome. It's truly awesome to talk to people like you and so many people that are in this space that are really doing really creative things. Because again, you're pushing the boundaries just by getting an opportunity to be able to mess around with so much of this stuff. And could you just highlight the fact that I have no doubt about this, that you've had failures in your process of doing this too, where you go in thinking, hey, this is what the literature says, or this is an idea, and then it doesn't work. And that's normal. And that's a part of this process, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I say all the time, the G League was the best thing for me, and would not be in this position without me being in the G League. Just a great opportunity to do exactly as the players do, and experiment and fail and self-correct and self-organize and figure out ways to be more efficient and more effective as is really what my 3 years in the G League were, and constantly doing that still today. Always trying new things, always want to see if this makes sense. And again, it's just a constant game of self-correction and organization.
Beautiful part of the process, and you reference the art of coaching, and that is the particular art of coaching, isn't it? Is, yeah, you can educate yourself, but when you're on the floor, some things just don't work
Yes.
the
And
way
then
you think they
it's
work.
on you to pivot and audible and get to something that makes sense, and again, just helps your player improve and put them in a good environment.
And sometimes I would actually tell my players, hey, listen, this didn't work. We're going on one. Because I think that humility and that part of the process that they go through is the same as we go through as a coach. And it's okay to highlight that. Sometimes I definitely don't highlight it. Sometimes I make it seem like, hey, this is what was supposed to happen. But it's a balance to that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes in a lot of different directions, right? But us as coaches, we should try to take a player's mentality. I try to have people that coach me. I try to have film sessions done on me when I'm on the court so that I can learn from how I'm teaching or what that drill looked like from my explaining perspective, just as a player would from us sitting down and watching film with them. And I think if you have the same mentality as a player where you're trying to be coached, you're trying to learn, you're trying to experiment, and you're trying to problem solve, I think that's ultimately what can help you the most.
Can you give coaches an idea of how they could do that? Is that something that's done live? Somebody's in there taking notes, evaluating, or is it something done on video? You're recorded with audio. Take us into that kind of the best practices in terms of that in your mind.
Yeah, again, we're really lucky in Boston. Art Horn is our head of organizational development and someone I view as my personal coach. And he's constantly bringing in people for us to talk to, constantly pitching ideas to me. And one of the best ones he did was having our film crew mic us up and film us as coaches and have us be able to watch that back. And again, brought in people to help us sit down and watch that film together. And, but again, yeah, just I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it, whether it's, like you said, having someone take notes for you or literally having someone video you. It's all about how we can improve as well.
I love it. I love it. And I encourage coaches to do that for their assistants and for themselves and have some different people. And someone independent is obviously just as valuable as someone within as well. So we know that.
Right.
Take us into the value of asking questions in the development process, not always giving answers, not always explicit instruction, but asking questions.
I think it's huge. I think it's huge during a workout and especially post workout. I think we say if the players can't teach it, then we haven't taught it. And making sure that they fully understand what we are trying to accomplish and what they are working on and how it applies is huge. I think when you end a workout, it's a great time to ask them to recap what they took from it. And that can be a journal session, that can be a legitimate conversation, that can be one question, but reflecting and asking questions is extremely important.
I love that idea. I talked about it, the literature, memory consolidation, moving something from short term to long term. To
Yep.
do that, you need to engage with it in somehow. You reference journaling. It could be just a conversation. It could be a peer conversation where they tell a different player something. But go a little bit deeper for us then in terms of that. We want players to be able to teach it ultimately. Do you ever
Right.
put players in a situation where they have to teach something?
Yeah, all the time. One of the, fun things we usually do is we have our younger guys usually back in the gym first, and they get the first crack at some of the new things we might do. And it's fun to watch them when our older guys come back, have them teach it instead of us doing it. And yeah, well, we are constantly trying to have our guys coach each other. You look at a guy like Sam Hauser, a guy that's elite in one certain area, they're the best teacher. And so if they can teach each other, I think it goes a long way in reinforcing what they're seeing and what is making them successful in that area. And then players obviously receive other players that are doing something at a high level in a great manner. So it's a great way to share information.
Love it. I love it. And can be applied at all levels. I've done it with U11 girls, and it's just a beautiful thing to be able to watch. And again, it helps with that memory consolidation of they don't have to be right. They don't have to be perfect. You're helping them learn in the same time. So it's awesome. You also mentioned fun, and I love that. I was talking to a WNBA coach right recently. It doesn't have to be this extreme, but the seasons are long, especially the NBA season. It's so long. And to not incorporate fun in some context, and it doesn't have to be frivolous, but some type of fun. They referenced that one day players showed up and unexpectedly they played pickleball a little bit just to do something completely different and get them out of their mindset of monotony of training. So can you give us a few kind of references of different things that might be construed as fun to be able to be unexpected and to be able to help players get beyond kind of the monotony of day-to-day training?
Yeah, no question. I think again, Joe is one of the best coaches in the world for a lot of reasons. But he's very good at this in particular. Just again, knowing the temperature of your team, knowing the temperature of your players, and knowing when they need a day of knockout or when they need to pull back and, like you said, play dodgeball or whatever the case may be. Again, the art of coaching is knowing when to push and when to pull. And I think Joe does that as well as anyone.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's fun. It's fun to know that needs to be happening at all levels, but sometimes we don't expect it at the pro level, but they're human beings too. And you can't remove the human being from it, can you?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's also fun to see your guys in a different environment at times and how they perform in a game setting. But yeah, no doubt about it.
See how competitive they are in dodgeball,
That's
for
right.
example. Something frivolous and fun just brings them back in. And I think to a certain extent, it reconnects them with the joy of being a young person who learned how to play basketball. And it was a fun game.
And just build a little chemistry with your teammates. Again, just competing in a different environment is always fun.
Love your experiences. Obviously, you're still relatively young in terms of your role and your position, and that's awesome. I've never been a believer in chronological age has anything to do with where you are as a person in life, and you've proven that. But maybe just reflect back on where you started and where you are. Some advice to younger coaches that are aspiring to do something similar as you, moving up the coaching ladder in some context.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I'm not in a position to give advice. I feel like I have so much to learn. But the biggest thing I would say is this: the harder you work, the more knowledge you gain. And the more knowledge you gain, the more knowledge you can share with your players or whoever you're trying to share it with. And so for me, it comes down to having a love and passion for what I do. And if you're in coaching, I'm sure you have the same passion. And again, the harder you work at it, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to grow, and then the more, information you have to share. And so that would be the biggest advice I have.
It highlights the importance of loving learning, doesn't it? And that's people I've been around with your organization. It seems to be something that's actively seeked out. Hire people that love learning. It doesn't have to be just basketball. It's loving learning, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no question. Again, back to Art Horn, just he does the best job for our organization at just constantly stretching our staffs. A lot of times people just think like it's the players that need to stretch and grow and be better. It's really everybody. And so if you can just be a lifelong learner, you'll improve day to day. Yeah, there's no doubt.
Craig, this has been awesome. I just love your approach. I love how you're sharing with us. It's been a wonderful conversation, but clearly we got to talk about it. NBA champion. That's pretty cool. Can you talk about that experience and kind of the season and just the experience of winning an NBA championship?
It's a dream come true. It was truly unbelievable. A kid that grew up in Boston, rooting for the Celtics, to be able to contribute in a small way to us bringing Banner 18 back to Boston was truly incredible. But I think more than anything, like we just had an unbelievable group of guys. Jeff Van Gundy said it, who was with us throughout the year, but has never been around a group of guys like that we had. Obviously, superstars on the court, but just superstars off the court as well. And it just makes every day so much more enjoyable. We obviously didn't have too much failure, but when we did, it was easy to bounce back and just made winning all that more enjoyable because you just loved who you're doing it with.
I enjoyed watching it. I definitely did not grow up a Boston fan like you did growing up in Boston, but I have such an admiration for you and your organization and all the people involved. And it's just fun to see people that are doing it in such a great high level to have so much success as well. So congrats on that. And thank you again, Craig, for sharing the game with us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.